Hi, and welcome to Alive with Chronic Illness, a podcast dedicated to exploring what it's like to live with and not in spite of chronic illness. Today I'm joined by occupational therapist Kait to talk about her experience of living with Miserable Malalignment Syndrome. Please note, today's episode contains discussion of surgery. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kait. I thought we would just get started with you telling us a little bit about you and your health journey.
Absolutely. So my name is Kate. I am a runner, a tennis player, a hiker. I love to learn new languages. I really enjoy traveling. So I like to live a pretty active lifestyle. But I have a condition called Miserable Malalignment Syndrome, and that condition has required me to have a lot of surgery on my legs. And so essentially what miserable malalignment means is the bones in my legs are abnormally rotated. So my femurs or the thigh bones point inwards and my tibias point outwards. And so I have had multiple surgeries to straighten those bones because I have lived with a lot of leg pain ever since I was a child, but it got a lot worse in my adulthood.
Yeah, so how has your journey with that been then? Because I can imagine it, like you said, living with it since a child and it got worse as you got
Mhm.
older. It's I guess, readjusting again. Like maybe you had a sense of what was normal for you as a child and then had to adjust to that, how that changed over time.
Right. I think like because I was a kid, like I didn't know any different. I honestly thought everybody had pain like that. Like everybody had pain. And I think maybe a part of it too was, growing up, people will say, "Oh, it's just growing pains, you know, you're just growing," or you are so active, like you're a runner, of course your legs hurt. But it wasn't until I was in college when like the pain got so bad that I wasn't able to do like some of my everyday activities. Like, I mean, first of all, like if I was running, I would come home from a run and my roommate would help like kind of pop my hips into place because they felt like they weren't where they should have been. And I also like started struggling with things like getting dressed, like putting on my pants, like became really hard. And stepping in and out of the shower was a challenge for me sometimes, like even like moving in bed, like getting up out of bed. And what's interesting at the time that all of this was happening, I was in college and I was studying to be an occupational therapist. And occupational therapists help people do their everyday activities, just like regardless of like what injury they may have or what, condition that they may have. And so I was kind of going through like my own journey, like my own experience of having trouble like engaging in those everyday activities that, we all do. So I was doing my best to apply what I was learning to my own situation.
Yeah, I think it can be difficult when you've had it since childhood. I've got EDS and I had arthritis as a child, and I don't actually like pain is a strange thing for me because I can't really imagine not being in it because I've always been in it. So
Right.
although I must have been in pain during my childhood and I remember being in like, when it was worse pain, but the day-to-day pain was just what I thought everyone experienced. I didn't realize that I still can't imagine like not being in pain and people not being in it. But it took me a while when I was growing up to understand that actually not everybody is in pain.
It's funny because, when I was in OT school, I remember I think the moment where the light bulb went off for me when I was like, oh, this is not normal. Like this is not what people deal with on a daily basis is when one of my classmates asked, like, okay, like we were quizzing each other for a test, and she asked, what, like on the pain scale, what is a normal number? Like, what should people be? And my answer was like 5, 6, like, like, and I was talking for myself. Like, I thought that everybody had, pain in their day. And like my classmate looked at me like, what? Like, are you serious? Are you in that much pain? And that's when she told me, she's like, no, people like normally, unless you have an injury or, a disability, a condition, like that isn't normal. Like people should not be in pain.
And even when you said that, my first thought was, yeah, five. I'd think, yeah, that's like a normal. I was thinking exactly the same thing. Like, so is
Right in the
like, what is the
middle.
normal? Is it zero? Is it supposed to be zero? I feel like I have to clarify because I have no concept of like what it should be like. Um,
Right.
yeah,
Absolutely. But I think, having, my, pain scale number be a 5 on an everyday basis, like I feel like that might help me, you know, in my career, understanding like what my my clients or my patients are going through, what they face on a daily basis.
yeah, I think it does because you've got that empathy and that understanding, and I think often we can be quite critical on ourselves anyway. And like I know myself as a patient, and I've had gone for like physio and things like that. I always want to push myself further, but it has been those physios that have been quite understanding and they're like, "Well, no, you can't just do everything in 1 week." And I think maybe having that lived experience allows you to actually also for the patients you're supporting, so they know that they're coming to you and saying, "I'm really struggling with this," and you can understand more like that they are really struggling, and they will feel more likely to be believed.
Right, right, absolutely.
So obviously, like your health has had an impact on your career as an OT. Was it an influence and why you decided to go ahead and train as an OT?
No, I didn't. I didn't know that I had, a disability until like really after college. So training as an OT, I think that was stemmed from initially, like, it was, I wanted to work with kids in some form. I love healthcare, love anatomy. I wanted to find something too that incorporated more like a psychological aspect too. And occupational therapy is kind of like all of that. It's looking at the whole person, right? It's looking at their environment, it's looking at their anatomy, it's looking at who they are as a person, the psychological aspects, the occupations that they want to engage in. So it was like just like for me, it was the perfect bit of everything. So that's why I wanted to become an occupational therapist. But it's been really difficult to work as an OT, especially with my condition. So when I was doing my clinical rotation before I became an occupational therapist, I was working in the hospital, and I really, really enjoyed that. But it was very physically demanding for me. And I started to recognize that, you know, when I had to lift patients, like, because sometimes I had to help get them out of bed and into a wheelchair or help get them into a shower or something, like, it really bothered my legs, like, a lot. So like once I finished with that rotation, I decided that maybe like it would be better for me to work with kids because like most likely like I won't have to be like doing any of that lifting. Sometimes I can work on more like tabletop activities, so it like helps my body. So after I became an OT, once I became licensed, I worked in the schools, and I thought, that's been a lot of fun. And I've worked in the schools for maybe 7 years, but it's been on and off because I've been having my surgeries. Because even working with kids, like it got to the point where, I would have to like walk around the schools, and like walking became really, really difficult for me. And kids are very active. So, we have to do things like, teaching them how to jump or, engage like on the playground and things like that. And it got to the point where I felt like I couldn't keep up anymore. So I underwent all of these surgeries to help me hopefully, get back to that one day. And I definitely want to go back working in the schools, but I also have it in my mind that I want to go, back to working in the hospital because I feel like I have that, changed perspective having gone through OT in the hospital myself.
Yeah, I'm sure that they're both very rewarding. And I think that like now you've had that experience of actually that lived experience of receiving it in the hospital setting, I can definitely see that being
Right, right.
beneficial. Yeah, definitely. And
Absolutely.
how did you find so like working within the schools? I'm trying to imagine what it would be like. So did you work in like a secondary school or like a high school or?
Yeah, I worked. mostly in elementary schools. So I saw students from kindergarten to about sixth grade. And I mean, I really enjoyed working with the younger kids. They're so cute. I really enjoyed it. But I have worked in like a high school before and a little bit with preschool age children. But I feel like elementary school was kind of that was my place. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. And I can see like what you say about the activity elements of it then. I think that definitely.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And how do
Um,
you find like the way you adapt like your practice? So in the hospital setting, versus in the school setting, is it a lot more rehabilitation in the hospital setting than it is in the schools, or is there a bit of both really?
yeah, in the hospital, at least in the setting that I worked in, it was more rehabilitation after a surgery or an injury or an illness. Whereas like in the schools, it might be, helping them engage, like helping them to be able to access the curriculum, right? The academic environment. So that could look like, helping with handwriting, like teaching them how to, form their letters and all of those skills that go into handwriting. So it's like, it could be skills like using their hands, also how they use their eyes to help, with the coordination of the handwriting. We can help with like social participation, right? Helping them, be able to engage with other peers and attending to the tasks like in the classroom because, sitting in a classroom it requires a lot of attention. So helping students to be able to, develop those skills so they can access their curriculum.
I can imagine that must be like immensely rewarding and so beneficial as
It
well.
is
And I had similar when I was at school. I had some support of like holding pens and things like that because I struggled with my hands. And it did make a big difference to me, finding ways of being able to do things that weren't painful. And actually, those ways that I was taught in literally in childhood, I must have been like 7, maybe 8. They still follow me now. So I'm still implementing those skills that I was taught by an OT at my school 20 years ago.
great.
So you make a lasting impact. I think that's amazing. And again, in the hospital setting as well, like the skills that I'm sure the patients will build while they're going through rehabilitation, I'd imagine will
Mhm.
follow them in their recovery journey and if they have any surgeries in future.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the skills, it's interesting to think, all the things that I learned in OT school, the things that I taught patients to do in the hospital, it came around like full circle. And like suddenly I was the one that, that needed that. And, even having a degree in occupational therapy, like I needed an occupational therapist after some of my surgeries. I mean, my surgeries are very extensive. It requires breaking my leg bones and rotating them, and it's extremely painful, to undergo those types of surgeries and like a really difficult recovery. And you feel like your independence is completely lost, after these things. So even though like my knowledge was there, I still needed help. Like I still need support from OTs, during that time or any, physical rehab, like physical therapist too. Like having that team has been very, vital for my recovery.
Yeah, and I think it is important, isn't it? Like sometimes we can't take our own advice, but we're good at maybe
Right.
being able to support someone else.
Right.
And is there anything that you've done in the lead up to your surgeries that's helped prepare yourself? Because as you said there, like they obviously can be incredibly painful. And I'd imagine
Mhm.
you must be anxious in the lead up, like to say the least, to those. Is there
Yeah.
anything that's helped you kind of prepare yourself?
Yeah, I think, well, a huge thing for me has been therapy, being able to talk about all the anxieties that come up. And I also think sometimes people, you might think, oh, after 9 surgeries, like you're just used to it by now. Like it's just routine. For me, it's not like that. I feel like after 9, I do just like it gets harder. It gets harder for me mentally. Maybe not so much like the anxiety because yeah, like I do know what to expect, but just like it gets harder for me mentally, like to feel like, okay, I feel like I just got my independence back. Like I'm just getting into the normal routine of things again, just to like have surgery and have to feeling like I'm starting all over again. That's hard. And so I like to be able to, talk about, all of those feelings that come up around that because it is a lot of grief and, and sadness because I feel like I lost, I don't want to say completely lost, but I did lose a part of my 20s, a time that I thought like would be prime. Like in my prime, I I spent having 9 surgeries and that's hard. So definitely, yeah, being able to talk and also, finding support from people who've gone through similar things. Miserable malalignment is not that common, so it could be really hard to find people who have had it. But I think too, the more that we talk about it, like we find other people who have it too. So yes, finding support that way too definitely helps me prepare for surgery.
Yeah, and I think people do seem to assume that once you've had like lots of different procedures, that it gets easier. Yeah, what you've touched on there, like the way that you lose your independence over and over again. And I think, yeah, I don't think it's something that gets easier. I think it's something that we, I guess,
Mhm.
become. I don't know if we become resilient to. I don't know what it is. It's an element of we kind of have no choice. It's a strength born
Right.
out of like a real lack of choice because there's nothing
Mhm.
else to it. Like you can't do anything. We have to face it, even when it's hard. And then losing long periods of your life that you had plans for and you had expectations for and things you wanted to do and mourning that is very valid.
Mhm.
And it is hard to think about. Like myself, like there's been stretches of time where I've lost years of my life when I was just so unwell, or I felt like I'd lost them because I was still there, I was still living them, but I wasn't
Mhm.
able to live them as I wanted to. I didn't have that kind of autonomy over my life. And I try not to think about it too much, but it does hurt that there's all these experiences that I could have done. And people often tell me like you do like loads despite like, or I don't really like the word despite your chronic illness, but people do tell me that like
Mhm.
everything that you're able to achieve. And I try not to think about what I could have achieved with I had a, if I hadn't have had these chronic illnesses. But there is an element
Right.
of like, yeah, I'm still doing the things that I love, but it's certainly taken me longer to get to this point in my life. Um,
Absolutely.
than I think it would have done had I not have had the health challenges. And that is it's difficult. It's and maybe the societal expectations that you said there, like your 20s being a time like the prime of your life, and the way that society perceives that we should be on this timeline
Mhm.
when a lot of your life gets put on hold because of health. I
Right.
think that can feel quite scary. And I often find myself feeling quite lost. Like, what should I be doing right now? Because I don't think sometimes I'm like, oh, I thought I'd have done this by now, but I haven't. So the beauty of it is I'm learning to make up my own timeline, but the downside is that you
Mhm.
do spend time mourning what you've lost because it's
Right.
natural to do
Well,
so.
and I think too, like as a kid or as like a teenager, you kind of like dream about what it's like to be an adult, and you have, like you said, those expectations of like this is like how I want it to be, and then when it doesn't happen the way you want it to, like that is hard, and you do grieve. I also like, one thing that I've really learned like through all of this is like because of my condition, have I feel like I've lost a lot of my favorite activities. So like I said, in the introduction that like I was a runner, a tennis player, I like soccer, I like to hike. I'm very, very active. And then to have this condition where like I could barely walk, I could barely put my pants on anymore. Like I felt like I had to grieve those occupations, you know. I I had to stop running about almost 4 years ago at this point, and that was like my greatest love. Like if somebody asked me, okay, like who are you, Kait? One of the first things out of my mouth is I'm a runner, and then to not be able to do that, just it was really painful. But I really feel like I'm learning to find other things that like give me purpose too, because I am more than just a runner or more than just a tennis player. Like, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And I think that's really powerful, actually, finding that purpose of being more than just like a few things like that. That obviously,
Right.
unfortunately, you couldn't do that anymore, and that was so important to you. But you didn't lose yourself. You lost a hobby,
Right.
or you lost something that was a big part of your life, but you are still yourself. Actually, I don't know if I'm
Right.
making sense of the way I was saying that, but
No, it's like, I mean, I feel like, and sometimes I still like I sometimes still feel this way where I feel like I've lost my identity. Like I lost who I was, but kind of like reframing like who am I? Like in my head.
Yeah. No, it makes sense because
Yeah.
it's something that I've thought about a lot recently. Because sometimes I think, especially when I've been in hospital a lot, I feel more like a patient than a person. And it was
Mhm.
just recently thinking about like who am I that is, I guess, parts of my identity that aren't dependent on me doing things like an
Right.
activity like being able to I enjoy hiking. I can't do that as much as I would like to be able to do. So it's like the parts of my identity that are still there, like I'm a compassionate person or I'm an interested person. I like to learn things. I'm really curious. And all these
Mhm.
things are still there, even though the physical things I can do change. The actual parts that make me myself, I'm still Elizabeth. I'm
Mhm.
just not Elizabeth hiking up a mountain. I'm, Elizabeth sitting at home on the sofa, but I'm still me. And I think that's been quite powerful for me trying to reframe that and think of myself separate from the things my body can physically do, because I never
Mhm.
know whether it's going to be a day it can do them or not.
Right. Right. I mean, I feel like, my occupations have changed too since, my diagnosis and with all of these surgeries. Like, I'm not able to run, but one of the things I've been doing is I've been writing about running. Like, I'm actually in the process of writing a memoir. And so for me, that's like very therapeutic and also a way that I can still kind of access running at this time. So, just trying to like find ways that like maybe you can't do that exact thing anymore, but like how can change that, like adapt that to help still, like feed your soul, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm really excited for to read that when it comes out.
Thank you. I'm excited too. I'm really excited. It's been quite the process, but I feel like writing that memoir has helped me heal in so many ways, kind of understand my diagnosis, and then everything that, played like those, everything that's happened, like played a part into who I am today. And again, not just that runner, but who I like really am as a person.
Yeah, and a way of tapping into something that you still are passionate about in a different
Right.
way.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And we spoke about as like occupational therapy and things people could do, thinking about things in different ways, like day to day ways you can build OT into your life and things that you can do with your chronic illness.
Right. I mean, there's so many like practical strategies that you could use that like you don't even need to be an OT or have an OT, to do them, just things to kind of like remember in your day to day. One of the things that I particularly like doing is creating like a routine or creating a schedule for myself. And like I want to create this schedule so I can incorporate those activities, in my daily life to help me maintain structure, but also a sense of accomplishment too.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that, we're human beings, not human doings, but like, for example, I have been really interested in learning new languages. So one thing that I do every day, like without a doubt, is I will sit down for like a certain period of time. Maybe it could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, and I will work on learning that new language because that like feels good for me. And when I set that time aside every day, like the same time every day, like I really appreciate that structure. And I don't know, yeah, I feel productive, but in a good way, not, oh, I just have to do this to like check the box. It's like, no, I'm doing this because I want to do it.
Yeah, because it's something that's important to you. And
Right.
refuels you as well. It doesn't just drain your energy. You don't feel an obligation, but it's important and it gives you that structure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think other things that are important are engaging in self-care activities. So like whatever that looks like for you, but just making sure that you set aside that time in your day to work on your mental health and your physical health, whatever that looks like. It could be, taking a relaxing shower or bath or whatever, or doing your nails. I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
makes people, happy and feel like they're really caring for themselves. Another thing is breaking tasks down into manageable units. I think that's something that, with any kind of, chronic condition is like really important important. Like, don't look at a task and think like, okay, this is huge. I have to do it all at once. Like, I'm not going to have the energy to finish. But if you like break it down into smaller, manageable units, then you won't feel as overwhelmed. Or if you're like us, I am assuming like
Yeah.
chronic pain, right? Like if we do too much in a short amount of time, like we're going to be paying for that later, maybe the following day, like the following week.
Yeah, definitely. And I
Uh,
think that's so it's important, isn't it, to break it down so you don't get to that point where you cause that flare up and get into like the boom and bust cycle, which is difficult to
right,
do. And I think there are definitely times when there's something I really want to do, and I know I'm going to overdo it, and I know I'm going to pay for it, but it's worth it. But I think day to day, like trying to have more mindfulness in what I plan because it allows me to more sustainably do things. I was quite before I would like do loads in a day because I had the energy, but then the rest of the week I would be really unwell. So balancing things out means I get the routine because I enjoy routine and structure in my life as well. I find it's just very helpful, particularly when I'm not feeling very well because the days feel a bit endless. So if I've got a routine that I'm following, I know where I stand. And I can't always be perfect with it because of my health, but having that consistency and this is what I'm doing at this time and a little bit of normalcy in my days when things are hard helps me get through them. It helps it feel a little bit less endless.
right. And in that you mentioned, being like planning your day. And so in occupational therapy, we talk a lot about the 4 P's of OT, in energy conservation. So those P's are prioritize. So like deciding what tasks are the most important, like what has to be done today, what can wait until tomorrow, and then planning. So organizing, the tasks ahead of time so you don't do any like unnecessary movements or unnecessary steps, if that makes sense. So like for me, going out of the house is such a chore. So if I can plan like, okay, I'm gonna do these 2 things like out of the house, then come home, go up the stairs because I have stairs like to my house. For me, that like planning ahead like that has been really helpful to save those unnecessary, like 20 trips up and down the stairs. And then we also have what's called pace. So take your time during your activities so you don't like overexert yourself, and like going slower and more steady will help prevent that fatigue and hopefully reduce the amount of pain that you're in. And then also the 4th P is position. So being very mindful about how you position your body, and then also positioning things in your environment. So for example, if your favorite sweatshirt is up in your closet, like really high, and every single day you find yourself like reaching for it, like kind of overexerting yourself just to get that sweatshirt, maybe considering, oh, maybe I can move that sweatshirt, somewhere else where it's more accessible to me, positioning the items in your environment. So like those are just some tips for conserving energy, thinking about what's the most important thing that needs to be done. How can I plan, doing these activities? How fast am I doing these activities? And then also, my position in the environment.
Yeah, and I think prioritizing so that you know what do you use on a daily basis and how do you access that? Can you make it so that like you said there, like your key items of clothing that you're going to wear on a regular basis, make sure that you've got better access to those, you can get to them and prioritize, I guess, things like that with everything really. Like with a kitchen for myself, if I'm use something
Yep,
regularly, I normally just leave it out, like a cake mixer. I just leave it out because it's a lot easier than having to lift it and put it in the cupboard. So yeah, trying to
exactly.
prioritize what does your day look like? Maybe even like sit down and break down your average day and think about what is in there that's not feeling so accessible right now and what can we do to change that.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. I think kind of on that note too, one of the things that I love doing is using adaptive equipment. And I've had to use a lot of that like during my recoveries because, things like getting on your pants after surgery, with a broken femur is not easy. It's not fun, but you can use adaptive equipment to help reduce the amount of pain and also increase your independence. So like, some of the things that I might use is like a dressing stick to help get my pants off, or, take off shoes or socks, using a shoehorn to help put on my shoes because a lot of the time I can't really bend over after surgery, or, using a reacher to grab things that are far away or help, put on your pants sort of thing. Also, using like durable medical equipment, or like medical equipment in your home, such as like a shower bench. I use that quite often, with my surgeries, but also like if you have, any fatigue, like when you get fatigue in the shower, maybe having a bench or a chair. Or for me, like I've had to use a commode after surgery, or raised toilet seat, because sometimes, getting on and off, like squatting down is really hard. Things like that that you can, place in your environment to make it easier for you to do those activities.
Yeah, I think that's quite helpful. And certainly, like for myself, if I adapt things, it just saves energy and it makes it a lot easier. And then I can
Right.
do more, which is why I'm very keen on it. And always thinking, like, what do I do and how could I do it better? Because I know how much of an impact that has and how the things I want to do with my life, I can do more of them if I adapt things around my home. And it's not always, I don't think it's always like easy. I've definitely struggled with like needing to ask for help. And I always
Mm-hmm.
tell people there's nothing like you just ask for help, it's absolutely fine. But then myself, I'm just like, no, I don't want to. But I'm getting better at that because it makes a difference. And sometimes like
It does.
there's always things that we can't do. And adjusting things, making things easier. I think it's making it more accessible. And I guess one way that, and I can't remember who said this to me now, but someone was talking to me before, and I was saying that I struggled with needing different things. Like after I broke my ankle, I really struggled to get downstairs, so I used a stair lift. And they were saying, well,
Mm-hmm.
you couldn't just like a lot of people get in a car every day and they drive to work, and they couldn't walk to work. They couldn't like it's too far. And I guess it made me reframe it and think about the way that we all make changes to our lives and the way that we use things and accessing a car so you can get to work and me accessing a stair lift so I can get down the stairs. I think that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, thinking about them in the same way and kind of thinking of these are just things that I need to get from place to place. There's nothing,
Right.
wrong with needing it, particularly because I guess even though when our people use aids, I never think anything of it. And I think that's amazing. But when it was myself, it just the practice what you preach thing. I need to. I think it is like we do have these inherent pressures and feelings that we shouldn't have to ask for help, and as a societal thing, but we all need help
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
I absolutely agree. I struggle with that too, asking for help. Yeah, as an OT, sometimes I'm the first one to help somebody else, like accepting that help, and having, no shame around using a mobility aid or adaptive equipment. If it makes our lives easier, less painful, it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. If it makes your life easier, more accessible, and less painful, like you said, it's only a good thing. Well, I guess we're wrapping up now and coming to the end of it. So there's so many takeaways from what you said there about adapting things. And I'm just wondering, for you, has there been anything that stuck out that you do on a daily basis that you would like as a little takeaway message from this? If you're thinking about what can you put into your life, say tomorrow, from like an OT standpoint that might make it a little bit easier and would work for people with chronic illness?
For me, one of the most important things is finding the purposeful activities. So really thinking about what provides me, the most meaning in my life. Like, what can I do to help me feel good during this time? I think is very, very important. I also think, you know, like OT strategies, like, yeah, we focus a lot on, managing like physical limitations, but also, like I said, the meaningful choices and how we can adjust, our daily life to improve our overall well-being is really important. So I think reflecting maybe on like your day, pay like tomorrow, pay attention to what exactly you're doing in a day and how you can make things a little bit easier for yourself is really important.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. That is a brilliant tip. And I think that's something that anyone could put into practice tomorrow and start to see benefits from. And even if it's just the benefits to the mindset of thinking what matters to me and perhaps even like we spoke about identity a little bit, looking at what you prioritize in your life can sometimes help you understand a bit more about yourself. And maybe if you feel like you're not prioritizing the things that are important to you, getting back to that and thinking, well, what's important to me? Who am I? And what do I want? And then using that kind of tool as well to think, right, I'm prioritizing these things, but I'd actually love to be prioritizing this thing. So yeah, I love that. And
Right.
thank you. Thank you
Right.
so much for coming on today and for chatting with me. You've been brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
To learn more about Kait, check out the links in the description. You can follow us to keep up to date with the latest episodes. And as always, thanks for listening.